The screaming started at 4:36 in the afternoon. Emma Voss, 8 years old, wore a torn pink jacket 2 sizes too small, the kind donated by strangers who meant well but could not fill the gap between charity and love. Her mother's name was Nora. Her mother's hands were calloused from double shifts at the Sunset Care Home, where she changed bedpans and stole meal trays nobody would miss, lukewarm mashed potatoes, congealed gravy, a dinner roll hard enough to break teeth. The parking lot behind the abandoned warehouse smelled like rust and engine oil and the sharp ammonia stench of old urine in concrete corners. Emma's sneakers, size 4, their soles separating from the uppers like wounds opening, slapped against the cracked pavement as the man dragged her toward the black sedan. His name was Douglas Hale. 43 years old. A former boyfriend of Nora's, the kind of man whose fists had written a history of violence across her back in languages only her body understood. The kind of man who knew Detective Morrison personally, who knew which cops could be bought, which judges preferred envelopes of cash to justice. "Get in the car," Douglas snarled, his voice like something dragged through broken glass. Spit flew from his lips. His grip on Emma's wrist was a vice. "Your mother has no legal right to keep you from me. I have a custody agreement. I have witnesses. I have—" Nora did not hear the rest. She was already moving. Her work shoes, scuffed Payless flats that cost $9 3 years ago, slapped against the asphalt in a rhythm like a heartbeat. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, before fear could anchor her feet to the ground. She was not thinking about the $34 in her pocket, every penny counted to last until Friday. She was not thinking about her job, about how one more absence might mean termination. She was not thinking about anything except that her daughter's scream had cut through the October air like a blade wrapped in ice. She grabbed Emma. Her hands, small but desperate with the strength only a mother knows, pulled her daughter away from Douglas. Emma's arms wrapped around Nora's neck. The child's body trembled like a leaf in a hurricane. "You cannot take her," Nora said. Her voice, barely a whisper, shattered like glass against Douglas's rage. "You signed away your rights. You signed everything away." Douglas's face twisted. Purple veins bulged at his temples. "You think you can hide from me? You think you can take my daughter and disappear into whatever hole you crawled out of? I will find you. I will find her. And when I do—" Across the street, inside a black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows so dark they swallowed light itself, a man sat motionless in the back seat. His name was Aleandro Caruso. 41 years old. His blind eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses even in the fading afternoon, turned toward the screaming with the precision of a man who had learned to see through rage, through tone, through the invisible frequencies of human desperation. The driver's name was Marco. 15 years he had served Aleandro Caruso. 15 years of loyalty written in blood and silence and the kind of trust that only forms between men who have stood in the darkness together. Marco watched through the windshield, his jaw working. "Boss," Marco said. His voice was steady, but something in it had shifted. Something in his breathing had changed. "There is a situation. A man is threatening a woman and child. The woman is protecting the girl. The man he is escalating." Aleandro's head tilted toward the scene across the street. His fingers tightened on the mahogany cane resting against his leg. The cane had belonged to his grandfather, who had been blind since age 19. A family inheritance of darkness. "Tell me exactly what you see," Aleandro said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that made men bend without understanding why. Marco described it all. Every detail. The child's age, 8, maybe 9. The woman's protective stance, her body a shield between the predator and the prey. The man's aggressive posture, shoulders squared, fists clenched, the body language of someone accustomed to violence and sure of his dominion over smaller things. Aleandro's knuckles went white. The cane creaked under the pressure of his grip. In the front passenger seat, another man named Dario felt the temperature in the vehicle drop like a curse settling over them. Something in Aleandro's silence was more dangerous than any thunder. "Get out," Aleandro said quietly. "Now." Marco and Dario moved with the silent precision of apex predators. The car doors opened. Their suits, tailored Italian wool, the kind of fabric that cost more than Nora Voss earned in 3 weeks, caught the late afternoon light as they crossed the street. Their movements were unhurried. They did not run. Men like this did not need to run. The world moved out of their way. Douglas saw them coming. Something in the cut of their jackets, in the way their eyes held no mercy, told him everything he needed to know about his hierarchy in the world. He ran. His shoes, cheap, worn, desperate, pounded the pavement as he sprinted toward his sedan. The engine roared. Gravel sprayed like shrapnel. He was gone in seconds, leaving nothing but the smell of burning rubber and fear. Nora collapsed to her knees on the cold asphalt, holding Emma against her chest. Her daughter's screams had transformed into quiet sobs, the kind that come from a place too deep for words. She held Emma's head against her shoulder, rocking back and forth, not understanding who these men in expensive suits were or why they had intervened or what price this mercy might exact. Marco and Dario exchanged a look that lasted less than a second but contained entire conversations. In 15 years, neither had ever seen Aleandro Caruso react to strangers with that kind of immediacy. That kind of rage. That kind of precision. Inside the Mercedes, Aleandro sat perfectly still. His sightless eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, were turned toward the direction where the woman knelt with her child. He said nothing. His silence was absolute. But in that silence, every plan Nora Voss had made for her future was being rewritten by forces she could not see and could not escape. Marco opened the car door. Aleandro's cane tapped once against the asphalt, a deliberate, measured sound. A sound like a judge's gavel striking wood. "Marco," Aleandro said quietly. "Find out who that woman is. Find out everything. Her name. Her address. Her employment. Her debts. Her fears. Find out everything, and bring it to me." "Yes, boss," Marco said. What Nora Voss did not know, as she knelt in a parking lot with her daughter's tears soaking into her shoulder, was that a blind man had just decided her fate. That the choice to save her had already been made. That the machinery of an entire empire was about to shift in response to her scream. She knew only one thing in that moment: they were still alive. Emma was still alive. For now, the storm had passed. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, 3 weeks earlier, when Nora Voss was still invisible to everyone who mattered. The alarm on her phone did not ring. It vibrated. At 5:13 in the morning, inside a studio apartment in the heart of Los Angeles, Nora Voss woke to that vibration because she could not afford to wake her daughter with sound. The place she called home was 340 square feet of worn carpet, water stains on the ceiling shaped like continents, a window that looked out onto an alley where homeless men urinated against brick walls at 3 in the morning. She sat up in the dark. Her back ached. It always ached. There were scars running in every direction like a map of hell, and they throbbed with the cold, with the damp, with memories that refused to stay buried. The $34 in her pocket, the last of her money before the next shift, sat in a mason jar on the kitchen counter. Next to it was a photograph. A man with kind eyes and a crooked smile. Her husband, Michael. Dead 3 years. An aneurysm in the brain, sudden and final, the kind of death that gives no warning, asks no permission. He had been holding their daughter when it happened. He had fallen backward, and Emma had screamed, and by the time the ambulance came, Michael was already on his way to somewhere Nora could not follow. That photograph was the only thing in the apartment worth protecting. She dressed in the dark. The uniform for the Sunset Care Home was white, clinical, designed to be invisible. To mark her as someone hired to clean up other people's messes. She pulled her hair back into a braid so tight it felt like punishment, a style that said, "I will not distract anyone. I am not here to be noticed. I am here to serve." Emma was still sleeping on the pull-out couch when Nora left the apartment at 6:19. The babysitter, a woman named Rosa, the only person who could be convinced to watch Emma for the ridiculously small amount Nora could afford to pay, would arrive at 7 in the morning. Rosa was kind. Rosa had 3 children of her own and understood the mathematics of survival, understood that some mothers did what they had to do. The bus arrived at 6:51. Nora paid the fare with $2.75. That left her with $31.22 for the rest of the week. The Sunset Care Home sat on Wilshire Boulevard in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The building was 8 stories of beige concrete, the kind of architecture designed to minimize joy. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and old people and the particular loneliness of human decline. Nora did not allow herself to think about what would happen to her if she ever ended up in a place like this, abandoned by children, waiting for someone paid minimum wage to change her sheets. The kitchen was her destination. The place where leftover dinner trays were collected, where food that nobody would eat was supposed to be discarded. Nora had learned long ago that much of it could be salvaged. Lukewarm mashed potatoes. Congealed gravy. Dinner rolls hard enough to break teeth, but soft enough for a child to eat. She wrapped these things in plastic bags and hid them in her locker. "You know they can fire you for that," said a voice behind her. Nora turned. Linda, another housekeeper, maybe 60 years old, with a kind face that comes from knowing too much suffering. Linda had worked at the Sunset Care Home for 14 years. Linda had also raised 3 children alone. Linda understood. "I know," Nora said quietly. "Your daughter is 8 now." "Yes. Same as mine was when my husband left." Linda looked at the food in Nora's hands like she was looking at something sacred. "Do what you need to do. I will not see anything." The shift lasted 12 hours. Nora changed sheets stained with bodily function she did not allow herself to think about too much. She mopped floors. She listened to old people's stories about children who never visited, grandchildren who had forgotten them, a lifetime of love that had somehow turned into abandonment. At 5 in the afternoon, a woman in room 318 pressed the call button. Her name was Mrs. Chen. 92 years old. Her breathing came shallow and fast, like something was crushing her chest. "Help me," Mrs. Chen said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Nora called for a nurse. The nurse arrived. An ambulance was called. At 6:36 in the evening, Mrs. Chen was gone, transferred to the hospital with a suspected heart attack. Nora finished mopping room 318. The room was already being prepared for someone new. The bus ride home took 40 minutes. Nora sat in the back, holding the plastic bags of salvaged food against her chest. The $31 was still in her pocket. She had not spent a single penny all day. That was how you survived. That was the mathematics of living on nothing. Rosa was waiting when she arrived at the apartment. Emma had eaten the leftover mashed potatoes Nora had brought home from the day before. She had done her homework. She had drawn a picture of her mother in green marker, the color so bright and alive it hurt to look at. "How was she?" Nora asked Rosa. "Perfect," Rosa said. "Like always. She misses you, but she is strong. She gets that from you." After Rosa left, Nora sat on the pull-out couch with her daughter. Emma was already drowsy, the way children get drowsy when they have eaten enough and felt safe enough. Nora looked at the drawing. Her daughter had drawn her with long hair and a smile. In the picture, Nora looked happy. In the picture, Nora looked free. "Mama," Emma said, her voice already fading into sleep. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Nora did not know how to explain that being like her meant learning to count pennies. Learning to swallow shame. Learning to disappear. Learning to make yourself small enough that the world could not hurt you anymore. She held her daughter and said nothing. Outside the window, Los Angeles hummed with a million other people's lives, a million other stories of survival and heartbreak. Somewhere across the city, in a high-rise office that looked down on all of this like a god surveying ants, Aleandro Caruso was reading a file about a woman named Nora Voss. The file had been prepared by Marco. Every detail was there. Her age, 34. Her employment, underpaid housekeeper at a care facility. Her debts, $3,400 in unpaid medical bills from her husband's death. Her vulnerability, a child who needed her, a man from her past who would not let her go. And at the bottom of the file, in Marco's careful handwriting, was a single note: the way she protected the child. The way she stood between the predator and the prey. That is something rare in this world. That is something worth protecting. Aleandro removed his dark sunglasses. His blind eyes, pale and unseeing, were turned toward the window that looked out over Los Angeles. Somewhere in this city was a woman who had chosen to be brave when bravery could get her killed. Somewhere in this city was a man like Douglas Hale who believed he owned her. Aleandro had spent 41 years learning that the world belonged to people who were willing to take it. He had spent 41 years building an empire on the backs of men's fear and women's desperation. But he had never spent a day, not one single day, learning how to save someone. He stood. His cane tapped against the floor. The sound echoed through the office like a heartbeat that refused to stop. That had all changed 3 weeks ago in a parking lot behind an abandoned warehouse. That had all changed the moment he heard a child scream and did not look away. 3 weeks earlier, in the pre-dawn darkness of a Los Angeles October, Nora Voss sat in her 2003 Honda Civic in the parking lot of Sunrise Elder Care Facility, her hands trembling as she counted the same 27 crumpled bills for the third time that morning. Single bills, mostly. A few fives. The radio was off because the gas gauge was hovering just above empty and every mile mattered now. $34. That was all she had left in the world. $34 until Friday, when the care facility would deposit her paycheck, and Friday was 4 days away. 4 days. She did the math again, the way she had learned to do it in the dark, in her head, without using her fingers, because using her fingers made it feel more real. Gas would cost $18 to make it back and forth to work. Bread, eggs, maybe some rice if the discount grocery had sales. That left $6 for Emma's school lunch account, and Emma's teacher had already sent home 2 notes about the account being low, written so carefully to be kind, which somehow made it worse. The kindness made it unbearable. She touched the photograph tucked into the sun visor above her head. Michael. Frozen in a moment before everything broke. He was smiling in the picture, holding Emma when she was just 3 years old, both of them caught mid-laugh in the backyard of the house they used to own. The house was gone now. Foreclosed. Sold to pay the hospital bills from his final 6 months, from the chemotherapy that had poisoned him slowly and the radiation that had burned him from the inside out and the surgeries that had cost more money than she would earn in the next 15 years. 37 years old when he died. That was all he got. 37 years and a pile of medical debt that had crushed her into the shape of something barely human. The clock on the dash read 5:58 a.m. 2 minutes until she had to go inside. 2 minutes before she became invisible again, before she became the woman nobody saw while she changed bedpans and wiped mouths and fed people who forgot her name by dinnertime, who would call her Jennifer or Susan or sometimes just you, the helper, while she spooned applesauce into their mouths and they stared at her with eyes that were somewhere else, somewhere better. She started the car. The engine turned over with a sound like something dying slowly, and she pulled into the staff parking area and turned off the engine to save fuel. 4 miles per gallon. That was what the mechanic had told her 3 months ago. 4 miles per gallon and your transmission is shot, but you probably can't afford to fix it, so just keep adding transmission fluid every month and drive it like you are carrying nitroglycerine. The employee entrance was at the back of the building. Nora used her key card, the magnetic strip worn almost smooth from use, and stepped into the hallway that smelled like disinfectant and something else underneath it, something like time and sadness and the particular smell of human bodies aging beyond their endurance. The morning shift supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had worked there for 12 years and had learned not to ask questions, nodded at her without looking up from her computer screen. Room 204 needs changing, Patricia said. Room 207 wouldn't eat breakfast. Room 312 had a fall in the night but is refusing the hospital. You know how it goes. Nora knew how it went. She had been working double shifts at Sunrise for 8 months, ever since Douglas had convinced the previous housekeeper that she should fire Nora, had convinced her with his smile and his persuasiveness and probably his connection to people in positions of power, and it had taken Nora 3 months to find this job. 8 months of 16-hour days. 8 months of coming home at 10 p.m. to find Emma already asleep, tucked into bed by Mrs. Chen from downstairs, Emma's homework half finished, Emma's lunchbox still in her backpack uneaten because Mrs. Chen had not known to unpack it. The laundry cart was heavy this morning. Nora pushed it toward the supply closet, a narrow room lined with shelves of folded towels and washcloths and hospital corners that could have been architectural blueprints for a life constructed entirely out of institutional beige. On a lower shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of fitted sheets, was a container of oatmeal that had been left on a breakfast tray in room 206. Mrs. Patterson had taken 2 bites and pushed it away. The oatmeal was lukewarm now and slightly congealed, but it was food, and Nora's stomach had stopped growling at her around 3 a.m. and had begun instead to make a sound like something small dying. She sat on the plastic step stool and ate the oatmeal with a plastic spoon from her pocket, eating quickly, not tasting it, just swallowing it down. The closet door was closed. No one came in here. This was the space where she could be invisible in a different way, a way she chose, which somehow felt like a kind of power even though it was not power at all. It was just hunger and shame and the particular talent she had developed for taking up as little space as possible. When she finished, she threw the container away and washed her mouth with water from the industrial sink and went to work. The hours blurred together the way they always did. Room 204. An elderly man named Harold who had stopped speaking 6 months ago but who reached out and squeezed her hand when she was changing his sheets, a gesture so tender it broke something in her chest that she could not afford to have broken. Room 207. A woman named Ruth who kept asking for her daughter, kept saying the same name over and over, Sarah, 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 and Nora held her hand and said yes, Sarah is coming soon, even though they both knew Sarah was not coming. Sarah had not come in for years. Room 312. Mr. Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen downstairs, a 92-year-old man with a bruise the size of a plum on his temple and a refusal to let anyone call an ambulance because he was terrified of hospitals and terrified of becoming a burden and had somehow convinced himself that denying the fall meant the fall had not happened. By 1 p.m., Nora had worked through her shift and was supposed to clock out, but one of the afternoon staff had called in sick again, and Patricia had asked if Nora could stay late, could work the evening shift too, and Nora had said yes because yes meant another $80. Another $80 meant she could buy winter coats for Emma before the weather turned, meant she could maybe put something in the school lunch account that did not feel like a mercy. Her lunch break was 45 minutes. She sat in her car again and ate half a sandwich she had brought from home, cheese and bread and mustard, and she did not turn on the engine because she was saving fuel. She closed her eyes. The sun was warm through the windshield. For 45 seconds, she counted, she allowed herself to pretend that she was not tired, that her lower back did not feel like something had broken inside of it sometime around 8 a.m., that her hands were not developing permanent creases from wringing out washcloths, that there was not a man somewhere in Los Angeles who believed he owned her. Douglas Hale. She did not want to think his name. Thinking his name gave him a kind of power that he did not deserve to have. But the thinking happened anyway, the way breath happened, involuntary and persistent. 2 years ago, he had seemed kind. That was what made it so difficult to explain to anyone. He had seemed kind. He had fixed her sink when it started leaking and had played board games with Emma and had laughed easily and had asked her questions about herself, had remembered things she had said weeks before, had texted her funny videos of animals doing ridiculous things. He had seemed kind and he had been patient and he had never rushed her, never made her feel like a broken thing that needed to be glued back together quickly before anyone noticed it was fractured. But 2 years ago was also a lie, because the kindness had a shelf life of approximately 4 months. For months, and then came the night when she said she was tired and wanted to go to bed early and his hand was around her throat before she could finish the sentence. His grip was not tight enough to cut off her breathing, but tight enough that she understood the promise it contained. Tight enough that she could see in his eyes what would happen if she ever said no to him again. Emma was at a sleepover that night. Douglas had arranged the sleepover. He had driven Emma to Mrs. Chen's building himself and had spent the evening being kind to her before dropping her off, because that was how it worked, that was how he controlled everything. He controlled the yes or no of situations that had not even happened yet. After that night, things had changed in a way that could not be changed back. The hand around her throat became a regular thing. The hand became other things. His voice became something cold and mathematical, explaining to her in detail all the reasons why she could never leave him, all the reasons why no one would believe her if she tried, all the reasons why Emma would be better off without a mother who was such a liar, such a troublemaker, such a woman who made things up. "You think anyone else wants you," he had said, his voice like oil spreading across water. "You are a widow. You are broke. You are damaged goods. I am the only person in this world who loves you enough to stay, and if you forget that, if you ever try to take Emma and leave, I will destroy you in ways that make what I have already done look like foreplay." 8 months later, she had tried anyway. She had packed a bag and taken Emma and had driven to a women's shelter in Inglewood where a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Jasmine had listened to her story and had nodded and had made a phone call to the police department. The police had come. A sergeant and an officer, both men, both moving like they were doing her a favor by showing up at all. The sergeant's name was Morrison and he knew Douglas Hale. That became clear within the first 5 minutes. They had worked together somehow, or knew each other from somewhere, or had an understanding that existed in the space between men who knew how to keep certain kinds of secrets. "Is Douglas here?" Morrison had asked, not asked Nora but asked the shelter worker, Jasmine, as though Nora was not standing in the room. "No," Jasmine had said carefully. "The client and her daughter arrived 3 hours ago." "Right." Morrison had pulled out a notepad that he did not write anything in. "You understand that making a false report is a crime, right?" "I am not making a false report," Nora had said. Her voice sounded very small even to her own ears. "He hurt me. He hurt me many times." "Where?" "My back. My ribs. My arm. My throat. Can I see?" She had lifted her shirt in front of 2 strange men in a women's shelter with her 8-year-old daughter watching from the next room. The scars were there. Long lines where his belt had caught her skin, a burn mark on her ribs where he had held a cigarette against her because she had not answered his call fast enough, bruises in the shape of fingers on her throat and her upper arms. The marks were there, documented on her skin like a map of a place no one wanted to visit. Morrison had looked at the marks the way he might look at graffiti on a building, something he had already decided did not concern him. "Doug did that?" he had asked, and she had nodded, and he had shaken his head. "Doesn't seem like the Doug I know. The Doug I know is a good guy. Maybe you should think about what you did to upset him before you go making accusations." Jasmine had stepped forward. "With all due respect, officer, the injuries." "The injuries could be from anything," Morrison had said. "Could be she fell. Could be she hurt herself. Could be she is exaggerating. The point is, without witnesses, without evidence, without a history of 911 calls, without medical documentation, we have nothing here." "I am telling you what happened," Nora had said. "And I am telling you that we cannot do anything with that," Morrison had replied. He had closed his notepad that had never been opened. "My advice? Go home. Talk to Doug. Maybe see a counselor or something. Work it out like adults. The last thing you want is to get involved in a custody battle and end up losing your kid because the courts decide you are an unreliable reporter." They had left. Within 2 hours, Douglas's lawyer had called the shelter and made a threat vague enough to be deniable but clear enough to mean something about frivolous claims and defamation, and Jasmine had asked Nora if she wanted to press charges and Nora had said no because what was the point, because the police already did not believe her, because she was nobody and Douglas had connections and connections mattered in ways that truth did not. She had gone back. She had taken Emma back to the apartment and had packed the bag away and had not spoken about it again because speaking about it only made things worse. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of his hand around her throat in the kitchen. 2 years of his voice explaining all the reasons why she was worthless. 2 years of hiding bruises under long sleeves and pretending that the burn mark on her ribs was an accident. 2 years of Emma asking Mommy, "Why is your arm purple?" and Nora lying, "I fell at work, sweetie. It is nothing, it is nothing, it is nothing." Nora's break was over. She stood and started the car and drove back toward the building. The afternoon light was slanting gold through the windshield and she thought about Michael and how he had asked her to promise him something during his last week, when the morphine had made him soft and honest. "Promise me you will not stay in something bad," he had whispered, his voice already fading, already half gone. "Promise me if something gets bad, you will take Emma and you will leave. You will not stay because of me, because I am already going." She had promised. She had meant it. But meaning something and doing something were different things entirely, and she was beginning to understand that leaving required a kind of courage she was not sure she possessed. The evening shift was darker, slower, more difficult. Room 209. An elderly woman named Dorothy who kept trying to pull out her full line and did not understand why Nora kept putting it back, kept saying to her gently, "Dorothy, we need to keep this in so the medicine can help you. Dorothy, I know it is uncomfortable," and Dorothy's eyes would clear for a moment and she would say, "I am sorry, I am sorry, I am sorry," in a voice so broken that Nora had to step into the hallway for 3 minutes to remember how to breathe. By 10 p.m., the facility was dark except for the emergency lighting and the glow from the nurse's station. Nora clocked out and walked to her car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before turning the key. $34. Her phone showed 7% battery. The temperature gauge on the dash said it was already dropping, already 38 degrees outside, and the weather report had mentioned a cold front moving in from the north, gale force winds expected after midnight. She drove out of the parking lot and merged onto the street and pointed the car toward home. The highway was empty at this hour. October had turned the sky black and absolute, and the wind was already picking up, already moving the car slightly in its lane, already reminding her that she was small and the world was large and there were forces at work that did not care whether she made it home or not. At the mile 47 marker on the 405 south, the engine made a sound like something tearing. Then the transmission light came on. Red and urgent and impossible to ignore. The car began to lose speed. Nora downshifted and tried to keep going, but the engine was shuddering now, the power dying, and she steered the car toward the emergency lane and felt it come to a complete stop just as the engine shut off entirely. The silence was total. The wind was the only sound, howling across the asphalt with the force of something alive and hungry and ancient. Nora turned the key. The engine would not turn over. She tried again. Nothing. Just the wind and the red emergency light blinking from the shoulders of cars passing her in the darkness, the sound of their engines fading as they moved on, as everyone moved on, leaving her behind in the cold and the dark. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. 3% battery. No signal. The wind hammered against the car and she sat with her hands on the steering wheel and thought about the $34 in her purse and the school lunch account and Emma sleeping at Mrs. Chen's apartment and the 41-year-old man sitting in a high-rise office across the city reading a file about her, and she did not know yet that everything was about to change, that the moment of her breaking was the exact moment that someone across Los Angeles had decided to start looking for her, that the universe sometimes moved in ways that were not cruel but were instead something else entirely, something like grace pretending to be coincidence. The engine was cold. The interior of the car was already turning to ice. And somewhere in the October darkness, Aleandro Caruso's men were moving through the city like ghosts. The wind scraped across the asphalt like something with teeth. 38 degrees. The thermometer on Nora's dashboard had stopped working 2 months ago. But she knew the temperature the way hunger taught temperature, through the shaking in her hands, through the way her breath came out in white clouds that evaporated into nothing. Emma slept in the back seat, wrapped in Nora's jacket because Nora had nothing else to give her. The child's breathing was shallow and steady, the only warm thing in the car besides the residual heat from an engine that had already died. Dead leaves skittered across the highway shoulder in waves, rattling against the undercarriage like something trying to get in. Nora's phone had 3% battery when the text message arrived. The screen illuminated her face in the darkness. Douglas. I know where you live. I know Emma's school. You can't hide from me. She stared at those words for 7 seconds before the phone went black entirely. 7 seconds was enough time to understand that the $34 in her purse, the job at Sunrise Elder Care, the apartment on Figueroa Street, none of it mattered anymore. He had found her. Again. Always again. The car was turning to ice. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and tried not to move because movement required warmth, and she had allocated every degree of warmth to Emma. The emergency lights of passing vehicles painted her windshield red, then gone, then red again. That was when the first black SUV appeared. It did not emerge gradually from the darkness the way normal vehicles did. It simply materialized, as if the night itself had taken solid form. The headlights were blinding. Nora's heart moved into her throat. For a moment, just a moment, she thought it was Douglas coming to collect what he believed was his. But the vehicle pulled up with deliberate precision, parallel to her Honda, and the doors opened in synchronized silence. 3 men emerged. The first one, tall and wide-shouldered with dark hair and a face that had learned to be unreadable, scanned the scene with the focused attention of someone trained to assess threats. This was Dario. The second man approached the driver's window. He was older, with the careful posture of someone who had learned to move through dangerous spaces without making sudden gestures. When he tapped on the glass, his knuckles were gentle. This was Marco. Nora cracked the window open 3 inches. Her voice came out shattered. You need assistance. She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. I am fine. Thank you. Just waiting for a tow truck. Marco's eyes moved to her car, the duct tape holding the bumper, the engine light still glowing red like a dying eye. He looked at her shivering form, at the way she was positioned in front of the vehicle as if her body alone could protect what was inside. It is 38 degrees. The nearest service station is 14 miles. Our boss is here. Let us help. I don't know your boss. I don't know you. I can't. But Nora stopped speaking because the middle SUV's door had opened, and a man was emerging that made the October air itself seem to pause. Aleandro Caruso was 6'3". His shoulders carried the kind of width that came from decades of carrying the weight of decisions that killed people. The charcoal suit he wore was tailored to perfection, the fabric worth more than everything Nora owned, everything she would ever own. White shirt unbuttoned at the collar. A cane in his right hand, moving with such practiced grace that it seemed less like an aid and more like an extension of his will. He wore sunglasses despite the darkness. Marco moved immediately to his side, one hand hovering near his elbow without touching, a gesture of absolute devotion. Aleandro tilted his head slightly, as if listening. What he was actually doing was following the sound of Nora's breathing, rapid and shallow, the unmistakable breathing of someone running from something terrible. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. What is your name? Nora hesitated. The blind man waited with infinite patience. The sound of the highway continued in the distance, constant and indifferent. Nora Voss. Aleandro processed the sound of her voice the way other men process documents. There was exhaustion in it. There was fear. But underneath it was something else, a desperate pride that reminded him of his own mother's face, the day she had refused his help because accepting it would mean admitting she had failed. Miss Voss, I am Aleandro Caruso. My men will fix your vehicle. You and your daughter will wait somewhere warm. This is not a request. It is October and you are shaking. I can't. Emma coughed from the back seat. A small, dry cough. The sound of a child who was sick and had been sick for too long because her mother could not afford a doctor. Aleandro's expression hardened. Nora opened her mouth to refuse again, but something in that small cough had broken something inside her. The refusal died before it reached her lips. She simply nodded. Tears froze on her cheeks. What she did not know was that Aleandro had already decided. When he made decisions about protection, they were irrevocable. They became law. 2 weeks later, Nora stood outside Vincenzo's restaurant in Beverly Hills, trying to steady her breathing. The restaurant's windows glowed like golden eyes. Inside, candlelight danced across white tablecloths. The scent of fresh basil and garlic drifted through the valet stand. She was wearing her only decent dress, a navy blue sheath from a thrift store with a small stain she had tried to hide with a borrowed scarf. Her hair was pulled back. Her hand clutched a small purse containing an ID and $34. The maître d' recognized her immediately from the instructions he had received. Mademoiselle Voss. Monsieur Caruso is waiting. The restaurant's mahogany paneling seemed to absorb sound. Every eye turned toward her as she was led through the dining room. She was aware of her worn shoes. She was aware of her thrift store dress. She was aware that she did not belong here, in this room where single bottles of wine cost more than her car was worth. Aleandro sat in the private booth at the back, mahogany on 3 sides, creating an intimate space that felt removed from the rest of the world. Marco and Dario flanked him, discussing territory disputes in low voices. They were dressed in tailored suits that cost what most people earned in months. Gold watches caught the candlelight. When they heard her approach, both men tensed. In 15 years, neither had seen their boss invite anyone to this table who was not family or business. Nobody came here. The booth was sacred space. Aleandro heard her footsteps, her breathing. He stood, something he never did for anyone. Miss Voss. Thank you for coming. Sit. Please. His voice carried the weight of an absolute. Nora sat across from him. The booth suddenly felt intimate despite the restaurant's murmuring noise. Marco and Dario exchanged glances that contained entire conversations. Your car has been repaired, Aleandro said, his blind eye somehow directed toward her. The mechanic said the transmission was failing. That has been replaced as well. Nora's voice came out thin. Mr. Caruso, I cannot pay for a transmission. I have $34. That is all I have. I did not ask you to pay. But why? Why are you helping me? I am nobody. You don't even know me. Aleandro's fingers traced the rim of his wine glass. The candlelight made shadows move across his face like living things. I know you stood in front of your daughter's door on a freezing highway to protect her from strangers. I know you work doubles at Sunrise Elder Care and eat food meant for patients because you send every dollar elsewhere. I know what it sounds like when someone is running from something terrible. His blind eye seemed to look directly at her. So tell me, Miss Voss. What are you running from? The question opened something inside Nora that had been sealed shut for 8 years. The words came out like blood from a wound that had been poisoning her from the inside. She told him about Douglas Hale. About the first time his fist had taught her the meaning of pain. About the 8 years that followed, mapped across her back in scars like a terrible history. She told him about the corrupt cops who would not take her calls, about the protective order he ignored, about the threats that had become constant as breathing. She lifted her sleeve. The burn marks were in a line, perfect and deliberate and terrible. Aleandro's knuckles went white gripping his cane. Marco and Dario exchanged glances they had never shared before. They had worked for Aleandro for 15 and 12 years respectively. They had never seen him tremble with barely contained rage. He will never touch you again, Aleandro said. His voice was quiet, but it contained the weight of an absolute. This I promise you. That was when Douglas walked past, 3 tables away. He was red-faced with alcohol and something meaner. Recognition flickered across his expression when he saw Nora. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't a smile. You think you can hide from me? His voice was loud enough to carry. Several diners turned. Bring our daughter to some fancy restaurant with your new sugar daddy. Aleandro stood slowly. Marco and Dario moved to flank him, creating a wall of expensive suits and contained violence. "You are Douglas Hale," Aleandro said, his voice so quiet the entire restaurant seemed to lean in to hear it. "Nora has told me about you." Douglas sneered. "And who the hell are you?" Stevie wondered. The restaurant went completely silent. The murmur of conversation died. Waiters froze mid-step. The only sound was the soft movement of Aleandro's cane as he took one step forward. Marco leaned in close to Douglas and whispered something. Something short. Something with a name in it. A family name. The color drained from Douglas's face. "You have 3 seconds to leave this restaurant," Aleandro said. "If I hear your voice again, if you come within 100 feet of Nora or Emma, you will discover what happens when men like you threaten what is mine." Douglas stumbled backward, knocking over a wine glass as he fled toward the exit. "What is mine? What does that mean?" Aleandro sat back down. His expression softened in a way that made both Marco and Dario realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. "It means you are under my protection now. You and Emma both." But in another part of the city, in a penthouse overlooking Wilshire Boulevard, Catherine Mercer was learning the same thing Nora had learned years ago, that some people are dangerous not because they lack power, but because they have been given it and discovered they enjoyed the taste. Catherine was 42. Platinum blonde that cost $800 every 6 weeks to maintain. Diamonds that caught light like tiny suns. She was an heiress to a commercial real estate empire, a woman whose family's wealth had been built on deals made in rooms where nobody questioned anything. She had watched from across a charity luncheon at the Beverly Wilshire as Aleandro's driver picked up Nora from her shift at Sunrise Elder Care. In the car, Catherine made a phone call. "I need a private investigator." "Yes, I know one." "No, nobody reputable. This needs to be done quietly, and it needs to be done fast." The whisper campaign began 3 days later. Catherine approached Nora outside the care home at shift change. She wore a Chanel suit and a smile that contained no warmth. "You must be Nora." "I am Catherine Mercer. Aleandro and I have known each other for years. I just wanted to warn you, he has a pattern of helping strays and then discarding them when he gets bored. Don't mistake charity for affection. You are a project to him. Nothing more." Nora's face crumbled. 1 week later, Aleandro brought Emma to Vincenzo's to meet him properly. Emma was 8 years old, dark curls, wearing her best dress from Target. She was nervous but curious, the way children are when they sense that something important is happening. Aleandro knelt down to her level. His blind eye somehow found her face. "Emma, I knew a girl once who was very brave. She protected her mother even when she was scared. That girl was you in the parking lot. I want you to know something, you are safe now. No one will hurt you or your mother again. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, then realized he couldn't see. "Yes, sir. I understand." Aleandro smiled, a genuine expression that made Marco drop his fork in shock. But that night, Nora received an envelope at work. Inside were fabricated photographs of Aleandro and Catherine at charity events. Typed beneath them was a note, "He is using you. Ask him about the $35,000 he owes the Marchetti family. Ask him why he really helped you." Nora's hand shook as she read the words. Doubt, like poison, began moving through everything she had begun to believe. That night, by candlelight, she began writing a letter. The envelope slid across the white tablecloth like a blade cutting through silk. Candlelight flickered across its edges, simple paper, sealed with a thumbprint instead of wax, addressed to him in handwriting that trembled. Aleandro's fingers found it with the precision of a man who had learned to see through touch, through sound, through the invisible currents that moved through every room he entered. His blind eyes did not move, but something in his face shifted. Comprehension. The kind that arrives like a death sentence. "What is this?" His voice carried across Vincenzo's dining room, deep and solid like an oath, but underneath it, something cracking. Nora sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap because if she did not hold them still they would shake apart. A year of survival had taught her how to swallow fear, how to smile through exhaustion, how to disappear into the background of other people's lives. But she could not disappear from Aleandro Caruso. He saw her with those blind eyes in a way that terrified her more than any threat ever could. "A goodbye," she whispered. Her voice sounded like something breaking. "I am leaving Los Angeles tonight. Emma and I will disappear. You will be safer." Around them, Marco and Dario exchanged a look neither had seen from her before: resignation. Finality. The look of someone who had already decided to die. The waiters froze mid-step. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Nora continued, the words spilling out like blood from a wound she could no longer stanch. "I found a job in Oregon. A care facility hiring immediately. We can leave before Douglas figures out where we are. Before Catherine ruins you. Before everything you have built crumbles because of me." Aleandro did not open the letter. He only turned it over in his hands, feeling its weight. "You believe you are protecting me by running?" "I know I am." Her eyes glistened but did not break. "I have seen how Catherine looks at me. I have heard the whispers at the charity gala last week. The way people flinch when I walk past them. I know about the $35,000 you owe the Marchetti family, Aleandro. I know I am a complication in a world that does not forgive complications. Douglas will keep hunting. And every moment I stay, I drag you into his darkness." Aleandro stood. The movement was unhurried, controlled, the way everything about him was controlled. His hand reached across the table and found hers with certainty that made her breath catch. His fingers closed around her wrist, not holding her captive, but anchoring her to something solid. "Listen to me." His voice dropped lower, but it carried further. The $35,000 was what Douglas Hale owed to the Marchetti family's gambling operation. He borrowed it 3 years ago and vanished. I paid the debt last week so they would not come after you for his obligations. You are no longer connected to his debts. You are no longer a liability. Nora's breath shattered. Catherine Mercer is a woman who mistakes obsession for affection and cruelty for power. She spent 3 months whispering lies because she believed I would choose her if I thought you were dangerous. That is the pathology of a predator. They cannot accept that someone might simply not want them. Your presence does not weaken me. It strengthens me. It reminds me why I built an empire, not for power, but for the ability to protect the people I love. The whole room went silent. Not the silence of people being quiet. The silence of people witnessing something impossible. Aleandro Caruso, the blind mafia boss who trusted no one, who had survived 37 years in a world built on betrayal and bloodshed, had just publicly declared his trust in a woman who counted $34 to her name. In 15 years of working for him, Marco had never heard him say those words to anyone. Not to his own lieutenants. Not to the men who would die for him without hesitation. "You want to know why I chose you?" Aleandro continued, his hand still holding hers. "Because when my men found you on that highway in the freezing dark, you did not beg. You did not try to manipulate. You stood in front of your daughter and refused help because you would rather freeze than owe a stranger. That is integrity I have spent my entire life searching for in a world built on lies. You stood there barefoot in the October wind like a woman made of stone and pride. I saw you then, Nora. I see you now. And I will keep seeing you long after Catherine Mercer is forgotten." Nora sobbed, a sound like something breaking inside her finally shattering the rest of the way. Her walls came down. Everything she had built to survive, to protect, to remain invisible, it all came down at once. Marco turned away, giving them privacy, but not before Dario saw his eyes glisten. The sound of the front entrance exploding inward cut through the moment like thunder. Douglas Hale crashed through Vincenzo's heavy glass doors at 9:15 in the evening, drunk and armed, his face a map of rage and desperation. His shirt was stained with vomit and cheap whiskey. His eyes were red. He was waving a pistol like a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Nora!" He screamed into the elegant silence of the restaurant. "Nora, you whore, you think you can replace me? Patrons dove from their tables. A woman screamed. A child cried out for their mother. The orchestra in the corner stopped playing mid-note, the violin bow hanging suspended in air. Douglas fired a shot into the ceiling. Plaster exploded like snow, raining down on the white tablecloths, the crystal glasses, the terrified faces of people whose only crime was wanting to eat dinner in peace. "You think this blind bastard can protect you?" Douglas lunged forward, his shoe crunching on broken glass. He stumbled toward their booth, the gun wavering but still raised. "I made you, Nora. I shaped you. You are nothing without me. Nothing." Marco and Dario drew their weapons simultaneously, a movement synchronized by years of standing beside death. But Aleandro raised one hand. A single gesture. "Stop." The men hesitated, but they obeyed. Aleandro Caruso stood from the booth with the slowness of a man preparing for something inevitable. He did not rush. He did not panic. He simply rose, straightened his jacket, and began walking toward the sound of Douglas's breathing with his cane. Douglas laughed, a broken, jagged sound like a knife scraping against bone. "What are you going to do, blind man? You cannot even see me. You cannot even see her face right now. She is crying. Did you know that? She is crying because she knows she made a mistake. She knows she still loves me." Aleandro did not answer. He simply walked closer, his cane tapping against the marble floor in a steady rhythm. Tap. 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 Like a countdown to judgment. "I do not need to see you to know you are already dead," Aleandro said quietly. And then he tilted his head toward Marco. "Call the Bratva. Tell Victor Volkov I have a gift for him. Tell him the man who stole from them 3 years ago is finally ready to face consequences." Douglas's face went white. The color drained away like water through a broken cup. "No. No, not them. Please. Anything but them. Mr. Caruso, please, I didn't know, I didn't understand." But his words disappeared into screaming as 12 men in black tactical gear flowed through every entrance of Vincenzo's like shadows given form. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn but not raised. This was not a threat. This was a capture. This was the end of a man's life delivered with administrative efficiency. Douglas collapsed to his knees. His gun clattered to the floor, forgotten. Urine stained his expensive pants. His hands trembled as he reached toward Nora, toward Aleandro, toward anyone who might offer mercy. "Please," he wept. "Please, I am sorry, please do not let them take me." 2 men dragged him backward. His heel scraped against the marble. His screaming echoed through the restaurant until a black van door slammed shut outside, muffling everything. Silence returned like a held breath finally released. Aleandro turned toward where Nora stood, her hands over her mouth. The whole room was watching him. Waiters. Patrons. Marco and Dario. All of them witnessing something they would never forget. "The Bratva has been looking for Douglas Hale for 2 years, Aleandro said, his voice carrying across the destroyed restaurant with absolute calm. "He stole from them. He beat a woman under their protection. He will spend the rest of his life understanding what it means to be hunted by people who do not forgive debts. He will never be seen again. And no corrupt police officer will ever find him." 1 block away, in a warehouse that smelled of concrete and blood, Douglas Hale was dragged before Victor Volkov, a man whose smile contained no mercy, whose eyes had seen atrocities that would break ordinary minds. Douglas begged. He screamed. He offered money he did not have, promises he could not keep. But Victor only smiled that terrible smile and snapped his fingers. The screaming stopped. The next morning, FBI agents arrived at Catherine Mercer's estate before dawn. They came with search warrants and handcuffs and the grim satisfaction of men who had been building a case for 3 years. Catherine, still in her silk robe, her face raw from sleep, stood in her marble foyer watching them seize her computers, her files, her photographs, documents that revealed a landscape of fraud so extensive it had corrupted 2 city council members, 3 judges, and a police captain. "Do you know who I am?" Catherine screamed at the lead agent. "Do you know who my father was?" "Yes," the agent replied, his voice steady as a judge's. "We also know about the real estate fraud, the tax evasion, and the bribes paid to public officials with your knowledge. You will want to call your lawyer. And quickly." By evening, Catherine Mercer was arrested at a charity gala, the same gala where she had spent months building her whisper campaign against Nora. She was led out in handcuffs while photographers flashed their cameras, while the socialites she had smiled at for decades turned away from her like she had become invisible. Her face twisted with rage and humiliation as the reality settled in. She had built her entire life on a foundation of lies, and that foundation had crumbled like dust. From across the room, Aleandro watched her being taken away. Catherine's eyes found his, and her scream cut through the party like a blade. "You did this! You destroyed me for some nobody waitress!" Aleandro did not answer. But Marco, standing beside him, heard him say something so quietly that only the closest men could hear it. "I did this because you threatened what is mine. The consequences are yours to bear." Catherine Mercer received a 40-year federal sentence. Her family fortune was seized by the government. Her name became synonymous with corruption. Every newspaper article spelled out her crimes. Every television report showed her face. She had spent her entire life climbing toward visibility, and now she was visible in the way she had always dreaded, as a cautionary tale. As nobody worth knowing. Back at Vincenzo's, in the destroyed dining room, Nora and Aleandro stood alone except for Marco and Dario cleaning up broken glass. The restaurant smelled like plaster dust and spilled wine and the lingering ghost of terror. Aleandro's hand found hers in the darkness. "Why do you trust me?" Nora asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have nothing. I have no family. I have no reputation. I am nobody," Aleandro finished. "You were nobody when I found you on that highway. And you chose to be nobody rather than compromise your integrity. But you are not nobody to me. You never were. Trust is not something I give, Nora Voss. It is something I recognize. And you are the only person who has ever chosen to stay when staying was dangerous." The photograph in Nora's pocket, the one of her late husband, taken on their wedding day, suddenly felt lighter. Like she could finally let it go. Like she was finally ready to stop being defined by what she had lost and start being defined by what she had found. Marco and Dario watched them stand there in the wreckage of the restaurant, in the wreckage of everything that had tried to destroy them, and both men understood something they had never understood before. Family is not always bound by blood. It is bound by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon when Los Angeles held its breath between seasons, Nora Voss stood in the doorway of a brownstone in Hancock Park and felt something shift inside her chest. The building was honey-colored brick with white trim, 3 stories tall, with a small garden in front where roses grew wild and untended. Aleandro had purchased it 2 weeks after Catherine's arrest. He had done so without asking, without bargaining, without expecting anything in return. The deed was simply placed in her name one morning, signed by lawyers who moved like shadows. Emma burst through the front door and ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing off hardwood floors that had been silent for decades. The child's laughter, pure, unburdened, the sound of someone who had never learned to hide, filled every corner of the house like sunlight pouring through open windows. "Mommy, look!" Emma called from the 2nd floor. Her new room was painted lavender, a color Aleandro had asked Emma to choose herself from 30 paint samples. The walls were lined with bookshelves. Not the sparse, half-empty kind Nora had known her whole life, but shelves heavy with stories. Picture books with torn spines sat beside chapter books with uncracked spines, waiting. A window seat overlooked the small garden where roses bloomed in shades of cream and coral. Emma sat on the window seat and patted the space beside her. "This is where I will read," she said with complete certainty. "Every single day. Nora lowered herself onto the cushion, and for the first time in 8 years, she did not count the cost of comfort. She did not calculate whether sitting here was a luxury she could afford to steal. She simply sat with her daughter and watched the light change across the garden. By evening, the three of them sat at a long mahogany table in Aleandro's estate in the hills above the city. The dining room opened onto a terrace where the lights of Los Angeles stretched toward the horizon like promises written in electricity. Marco and Dario occupied chairs at the far end of the table. They had become constants in both their lives, security that had transformed into something closer to family. Emma chatted about her new school. She described her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Chen, who had kind eyes and did not ask Emma questions about her past. She talked about the other children, how they knew nothing about Douglas Hale, nothing about highways or foster care or mothers who worked until their hands bled. In this new school, Emma was simply a girl who loved reading and had strong opinions about recess. Nothing more. Nothing less. "She's made 3 friends already," Nora said, her voice catching slightly. "She invited them for a sleepover next month." Aleandro's face, which most people knew as a mask of controlled intensity, softened at the corners. His hand rested on the table near Nora's. He did not touch her, but the proximity was its own form of contact. Marco noticed. He exchanged a glance with Dario that said without words, "Something has fundamentally changed." The meal was simple, pasta made by Aleandro's chef, a woman named Lucia who cooked the way his mother had taught her before she died. Fresh bread. Wine that cost more than Nora's monthly rent used to be, but she drank it without calculating its value. Olive oil that tasted like earth and rain. After Emma fell asleep between them on the drive back to Hancock Park, Nora sat in the passenger seat and studied Aleandro's profile. His eyes were dark and straight ahead, his hand steady on the wheel. She had learned that blindness had not made him helpless. It had made him careful. It had made him precise. "How did you know she needed a window seat?" Nora asked. "How did you know that before she even saw it, before she could even articulate it?" He was quiet for a long moment. His scar, running from temple to cheekbone, caught the passing streetlights like something alive. "Because I was a child who needed safe places to hide," he said finally. "Because I learned that windows are different from walls. Windows show you the world without forcing you into it." 2 weeks after they moved into the brownstone, Nora enrolled in online courses. Registered nurse certification. The program was 4 years long, but she would be finished in 3.5 if she continued at her current pace. She had already completed 2 prerequisites while still working double shifts. Now, freed from the constant hunger that had consumed her time and attention, she moved through the material with the intensity of someone who had tasted scarcity and would never again be careless with opportunity. She worked part-time at a clinic on Wilshire Boulevard, a clinic Aleandro had funded through a network of shell companies and charitable foundations. The work was mundane and sacred. She took blood pressure readings. She assisted with vaccines. She held the hands of patients who reminded her of herself, exhausted, frightened, calculating how they would pay for medication they did not have. One afternoon, a woman came into the clinic with a bruise on her collarbone that she kept touching, kept adjusting her collar to hide. She was 26 years old but looked 40. She had the particular kind of hollowness in her eyes that only comes from years of violence disguised as love. Nora recognized her the way a person recognizes their own reflection. After the appointment, Nora sat beside her in the waiting room. The other patients did not notice. The clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead like something dying slowly. "You are not alone," Nora said quietly. "There are people who will help you. I know because I was you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She did not speak. She simply took the card Nora offered, contact information for a shelter, for a lawyer, for a detective who specialized in domestic violence cases and did not charge fees. She took the card like it was a door being opened in a wall she had not known existed. Meanwhile, the Caruso empire transformed itself. Aleandro did not dismantle it, such a thing would have destroyed the delicate balance of power that kept Los Angeles from descending into chaos. Instead, he redirected it. Shipments that had carried heroin began carrying medicines and medical supplies to clinics in neighborhoods where the government had forgotten to build pharmacies. Operations that had once been about extraction became about protection. He funded 6 shelters for women escaping domestic violence. The shelters had unmarked addresses and security systems that Marco and Dario personally trained. Women arrived with nothing and left with documentation, job training, legal representation, and the belief that survival was possible. The money that had come from blood now came from business interests that were almost entirely legitimate. Technology startups. Real estate development. The kind of wealth that did not require killing or being killed to maintain. 1 month after Nora moved into the brownstone, Aleandro called a family meeting. 40 men in black suits sat around a conference table on the 32nd floor of a downtown building that technically belonged to a private equity firm. The walls were windows. The city sprawled below like a kingdom that did not know it was being observed. Aleandro sat at the head of the table. He was dressed in a charcoal suit with an open white shirt. His scar caught the morning light. His blind eyes faced forward as if he could see every face present, every thought crossing every mind. Nora entered carrying coffee. Not as a servant but because Aleandro had asked her to come. Because he wanted her to understand the scope of what he controlled, what he protected, what he had built from ash. The men's reactions were immediate. Eyes narrowed. Hands tensed. A woman did not enter these meetings. A woman was not trusted with knowledge of operations and territories and the delicate arrangements that kept empires from collapsing. "Gentlemen," Aleandro said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through air. "This is Nora Voss. She has my complete trust. What you say in front of me, you may say in front of her." Marco, who had been present for every significant moment in Aleandro's life for the past 15 years, felt something shift in the order of the world. He leaned toward Dario and whispered so quietly that only his partner could hear, "He has never brought anyone to these meetings. Not even family." Nora sat beside Aleandro. She did not speak. She did not need to. By placing her at his side in that room, Aleandro had declared something that transcended words. In his world, trust was currency. And he had just made her wealthier than any bank account could. That night, they stood on the terrace of his estate. Spring had finally arrived in Los Angeles. The cold October wind that had carried her toward him on a highway 8 months ago had given way to warmth. The city light stretched endlessly, interrupted only by the dark shapes of distant hills. "You gave me everything," Nora said, and her voice trembled like it used to, but for different reasons now. "You asked for nothing." "Why?" "Because you already gave me what I needed," Aleandro said. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers tracing the lines of her palm as if reading Braille. "You stayed. Even when staying was dangerous. Even when you believed that loving me would destroy me. You stayed." He turned toward her. The scar on his face seemed to glow in the terrace lights. "I grew up in poverty with a father who used his fists instead of words," he continued. "I watched my mother hide bruises the same way you did. I clawed my way out of that hell and swore no child would suffer like I did. When I heard Emma screaming in that parking lot, I heard myself. When you refused to leave her side on that highway, despite having nothing, despite having every reason to run, I saw my mother's courage. You remind me why I built this empire, to protect people like you from people like him." Nora's tears came then. They came the way tears come when you have finally stopped fighting, when you have finally allowed yourself to be held. Aleandro pulled her close, and she kissed him with the kind of desperation that only comes from almost losing everything and then finding it intact. From inside the house, Emma's voice called out, "Mommy, Aleandro, come look at the stars." They found her on the terrace railing, her small hand pointing toward constellations. Orion. The Big Dipper. Cassiopeia. Aleandro described them from memory, his voice painting pictures of patterns he could never see but had always understood. Emma listened with complete wonder. This man who was blind saw the sky better than anyone she knew. The three of them stood there as the night deepened, as the city lights dimmed and the stars became brighter, and Nora understood that family had been rebuilt from ashes. It did not match the shape of her blood. It did not follow the rules she had been taught. But it was real. It was chosen. It would endure. 6 months later, Nora stood in the clinic where she now worked full-time, her name badge reading RN next to her name. Aleandro sat in the waiting room, Emma beside him reading a book about constellations. It was graduation day from her nursing program. She had done it in 3 years instead of 4. She had worked while studying. She had built something with her own hands. The diploma hanging in her office at Hancock Park was the first document she had ever owned that proved her worth through effort rather than endurance. That evening, she treated a patient who looked like her old self. The woman had marks on her wrists. Fresh marks. The kind that come from being held too tightly by someone who says they love you. Nora sat beside her. "You are not alone," she whispered. "There are people who will help you. I know because I was you. I know because someone showed me that survival was possible when I had stopped believing in it." The woman took the card. She took the number. She took the first step. Meanwhile, Aleandro's shelters had expanded to 12 locations across Los Angeles County. They had helped 300 women and 400 children escape situations that would have killed them slowly. Not quickly. Slowly. The way poverty kills. The way violence kills. The kind of death where you are still breathing but no longer alive. The photograph of Michael, Nora's late husband, sat in a frame on the mantel of the brownstone. Not hidden. Not pressed between pages or locked away in drawers. Simply present. Aleandro had suggested it one morning. "You can honor 2 loves at once," he had said. The past and the present are not enemies. 1 year after Catherine Mercer's arrest, Vincenzo's restaurant reopened. The damage had been repaired. The blood had been cleaned. The space smelled like fresh paint and new wood and the possibility of beginning again. Nora and Aleandro sat in the back booth where she had once tried to write a goodbye letter. Emma colored at a small table beside them, her crayons bright against white paper. The photograph of Michael sat between the salt and pepper shakers. "A year ago I had $34 and no hope," Nora said, her voice steady now, no longer the trembling thing it had been. "You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a reason to remember why I built this life," Aleandro answered. "Trust is the rarest currency in my world. You earned it by being exactly who you are, someone who protects her daughter even when she has nothing left." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Are we a family now?" Nora and Aleandro exchanged a glance. The kind of look that did not require words, because they had learned to communicate in the language of presence. Of staying. Of choosing each other when choosing was dangerous. "Yes, Emma," Aleandro said. "We are a family." Nora's voice, when she spoke the words that would define everything that came after, was strong and clear. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Survival is only the beginning. Redemption requires someone willing to stay. I stayed. He stayed. And together we built something stronger than fear. If this story touched your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that trust can be rebuilt and family can be chosen. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about love, power, and second chances you will not want to miss. Comment below, what would you do if someone showed you this kind of trust? Show the final image, Aleandro's hand covering Nora's on the table, Emma's small hand resting on top of both.